Good day, folks. Matt again. This time I'm in Point Pelee National Park, just outside of Leamington, Ontario, so right near my home area. Really, really neat spot. If you're ever in southwestern Ontario and you get a chance to go to Point Pelee, I really highly recommend it. It's not a big park, but it's really important for a number of different reasons. Really popular too for a lot of those same reasons. The annual migration of the monarch butterfly is a huge one. A huge diverse array of a plethora of different bird species. Really, really popular destination for birders. And frankly, it just looks really pretty now. It's still March right now, so the lushness of the Carolinian woods is not something that's quite apparent, but definitely worth a visit any time of the year. And I'm actually standing, you can see a little bit behind me there, in what was the graveyard of a homestead that was built here in the 19th century. It's interesting because I haven't actually been here in quite a long time, despite living so close. I haven't come to this part of the park for a really long time, and I think it's so representative of why both ecological and culturally significant areas often overlap with one another. So this area had a farm homestead, or two, I think two farmsteads on it in the 19th century, and of course that's European colonization, a result of European colonization, and you see that in the graves that are in this particular part of the park, in the graveyard section. But of course, us Europeans and folks like myself of European ancestry are not the first people here, and so there are also remains found of older individuals from a different time. Some of those of First Nations people. And just further up from where I'm standing right now, I believe they actually reinterred and ceremonially reinterred or had a ceremony for some of those First Nations individuals. So the continuity of a place like this, I know I've said it about European places before, in Ireland and the UK and earlier this year, but we also have that here too. And I just think it's really, really cool. And again, culturally very significant to this day, as it was however many years ago. On a slightly different point, I actually, despite my current apparel, actually just got back from Brazil. The 2024 Nuffield Contemporary Scholar Conference was in Mato Grosso do Sul. I'm probably butchering that. My Portuguese is terrible. But one of the states in, I guess you'd call it kind of central southwest Brazil. And it was 47 Celsius there, and I was absolutely dying. So I'm actually really enjoying the -8, -9 temperatures that we're experiencing here. Some interesting learnings, I guess, whatever descriptor you want to call it, from Brazil with regards to forestation and deforestation and so on. So we often think about deforestation when it comes to Brazilian agriculture, whether that's crop production or beef or what have you. It's kind of the brand that Brazil seems to have, or countries with sections of Amazon rainforest seem to have on the world stage. And I don't think that's entirely wrong, despite some of the things I learned in Brazil. However, something I didn't realize was, speaking nationally, Brazil has some rather stringent regulation around, or standard around, the preservation of ecologically significant landscapes. So, for example, in the state that we were in, Mato Grosso do Sul, 20% of the land, or of a farmer's land, has to remain as natural landscape. So that means you can't cut it down and you can't farm it, and that's a mandate. That's pretty wild. That's pretty radical. It would be here if it was anyway. And of course, if you go to different areas, that percentage changes. So I think, if I remember correctly, in the Amazon region, or the Amazon basin anyway, I think that's 80%. So it's actually the inverse. So 80% of the land in that area, and a ecologically critical part of the world, has to stay in its natural state. And there's a lot more to it than that, but just to stick on those two things for a moment. Now, illegal illegal deforestation still happens. That was mentioned many times. Um, and I have a feeling that the devil's really in the details when it comes to how the legislation actually plays out on the ground. But regardless, I do think it's interesting that that a country like Brazil has that kind of regulation around deforestation and land use, when countries like Canada definitely do not, or at least perhaps not in the way that it was communicated to me that the Brazilians do it. So that's one thing I thought that was quite intriguing. Everybody knows that, well, at least the common knowledge among a lot of people is, the simplistic narrative is, Brazil equals rainforest equals deforestation. There's some truth in that, but of course, like anything, it's not that simple. But while people have really strong opinions about what happens in Brazil, I often find that they don't seem to have quite the same strong opinions about what happens here. So let's take Ontario. We are actively still deforesting areas. We are. Like, this is a fact. If you go up to the clay belt in more northern Ontario, we're opening that up to farmland right now. Now, I'm not necessarily even against that. It's a complicated thing, but it is happening. And it's just one of these things I don't think people are entirely aware of. They're not entirely aware of the fact that we as farmers can often go in and just clear land, even in a heavily deforested area like Essex County and Chatham-Kent, with pretty minimal regulation. They may not be aware that any attempt on local municipalities to actually do something about that can sometimes generate a lot of heated discussion. Well, I wouldn't even call it discussion sometimes. I'll just say generate a lot of heat and animosity. It's it's just interesting to me where I could go out and I would imagine, I'm speculating, so maybe I'm wrong here, but I could go out onto the street of my local town or any number of towns or cities in southern Ontario, and I could ask people what they think about the Amazon and Brazil and agricultural production. And I'll probably get, I would imagine, some pretty strong opinions on deforestation and how it's not sustainable and all that. I could then ask them about some of the things that have happened here in Ontario historically, some of what our landscapes look like, some of what's, if they're aware of some of the land use pressures that we're facing in this province concurrently. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say people probably don't know that much. So to me, it seems like another case of, it's really easy to criticize something you think you understand, Amazon rainforest deforestation, and not actually pay attention to all of the pressures that are happening in your own backyard. And now I'm thinking, what are the communication methods that we could be using as farmers and as landowners, or frankly anyone that's concerned about the state of our Carolinian woods, our wetlands, even our northern forests? What communication methods do we need to employ to reach more people with this? Because the Amazon, the Amazon rainforest, it gets a lot of attention, and rightfully so. So I just don't know why the forests in our own backyard, the ones that we might interact with every day or drive past every day, if nothing else, why those don't get more attention when they're more directly impacting our lives.